Díomh go léir. Díomh go léir agus fáilte romh go léir roimh Coláiste na Sceilge. Good morning. We're delighted to see you all here this morning, and we're delighted to have you here at Coláiste na Sceilge. Coláiste na Sceilge is a community school, and that is very much what drives us here, is the community. So consequently, we're delighted to be involved with community ventures like the Dark Skies, and we have the school open for any community events at any stage. So if you're involved in a community group and you wish to use the school as a facility to host any community events, we're more than happy to oblige you. We're delighted as well to have the support yesterday of Kerry County Council and ACARD. We had about 135 primary students in here yesterday, and they visited the mobile planetarium from Blackrock Castle. And immediately after Christmas, the rest of the primary kids, well, the senior class from primary kids will be in as well. And we expect to have about another 100 in at that time. I know you're going to have a great day, and I'm very much looking forward to myself. I'd just like to point out a few things to you, if you wouldn't mind, just for your own safety. Fire exit here, up here, and over here, and the toilets as well, very important. Disabled toilet here, ladies' toilet at the top of the stairs, and gents' toilet just down at the bottom of the stairs. I'm just going to hand you over now to Mr. Brendan Toohey, who we're delighted as well to be associated with. Sure. Good
morning, Good John. My name is Brendan Toohey. I'm chairing the Destination Kerry Forum, which is developing the tourism strategy with Kerry County Council. And this is one of the specific projects that we agreed to work on over the last few months. I'm very pleased this morning to welcome the Mayor of Kerry, Councillor Pat McCarthy, and he's going to say a few words to kick off the day, and then we have a series of presentations. You see them there ahead of you. We'll start first a bit about astronomy for beginners. We have Professor Paul Callan from UCC. He's the in charge of astrophysics up there, so well known to the area. Dr. Niall Smith from CIT, also the director of the Blackrock Castle Observatory that John referred to. Third thing, we move in then to the archaeology side, and Dr. Michael Connolly, the county archaeologist here from Kerry, and well known, well published in this whole area. Very interesting there. Then we move after the break into a well-known person here, Sean McEntee from RTE, who's also very knowledgeable in the whole area of folklore. Again, another UCC graduate, but very much a Kerryman from Ballynair Terrig. And finally, on speakers, we have looking at the Welsh experience, and we have two very good speakers who I'll talk about later, and they're going to talk about the experience in Wales. So we then finish up with a concluding session where we'll talk about what we can do from here. And I suppose that's, for me anyway, and where I'm particularly interested in it is what are the next action points from here. So this is there's a whole lot of people involved in planning this, but first of all I'd like to thank John and John O'Connor and the school here who've been very involved, and we've had a meeting earlier this year up in Cork to look at facilities up there so that UCC and CIT are going to work with the school here, and we'll talk about that later as well. ACARD, of course, Frank Kern has been very involved, and then from Declan Murphy from Vault Ireland, who've been critically involved in this, and Declan's here with us this morning as well. So let me introduce Pat McCarthy, the Lord Mayor. So Pat, maybe come over this side because of the wall.
Good morning or afternoon, morning all the time. Travelling down here was interesting. Now, while the road from Coláiste to Cahersiveen is a well-known song, it was certainly interesting this morning, but beautiful as well, observing all the waterfalls and whatever. It was absolutely fabulous, and you can just imagine what that road would be in a fine sunny day. Just to deal with the issues today, I'll just read what I have on behalf of Kerry County Council. It's my great pleasure as Mayor of Kerry to welcome you all to Coláiste na Sceilge here in Cahersiveen, a very famous college indeed, for this one-day workshop on Astrotourism, and especially of how we can unlock the tourism potential of the dark skies over South Kerry. I want to welcome in particular our visitors from Wales, Ruth Coulthard and Ian Foster, very welcome. who have come to share with us their experience of the Dark Skies Reserve in Brackenbeacons National Park. And I'm sure we will learn a lot from them, and I know that they will be of great help to us as we try and develop a planetarium here in Kerry. I also wish to acknowledge our other speakers, Professor Paul Callanan from UCC, Mr. Niall Smith from CIT and Black Rock Observatory, Sean McAtee from Ballyferriter, and Michael Connolly from our county archaeologists. I wish to acknowledge the Chairman of Distinction, Mr. Brendan Toohey, whose idea this workshop is. And without ideas from people like Brendan, things don't happen. And obviously I would like to thank many people, but just a few this morning. Mr. John O'Connor, Principal of Coláiste and Sceilge, Fall to Ireland, ACARD, SKDP, Professor John O'Halloran from UCC, and indeed, as I said, John O'Connor, without his ID, and we wouldn't be here this morning. I would also like to thank the Kerry Education and Training Board for their support, and the staff of the Tourism Unit in Kerry County Council for their help in organising and supporting the event. We are still in the early stages of a long journey, but the local community leading the way and the support of friends like those here today, great things can happen. Now, I was in another situation recently where community hall and indeed children's playground was developed. And the reason it is going to be a great success is because the local people did a lot of fundraising and, if you like, took ownership of what is now a wonderful project for that town in Milltown. And I think if we here in Cahersiveen and in Kerry can row in behind this project, I've no doubt that everyone here and every child in the area will take ownership of it. Overhead, we have some of the darkest skies in the world, which means that when you view the sky here in Cahersiveen, as you may do in 2 other places in the world, in a very clear night, you will see double the amount of stars and objects in the sky that you won't see in other places that would have very clear skies. That's something that we have to cherish and indeed develop. Earlier this month, I had the opportunity of visiting Greenwich Planetarium in London. That's with the great John Griffin, which is sitting at the back. And to meet the staff there who generously offered their expertise and indeed any form of help in developing a planetarium here in Tralee, or in Cahersiveen. That help, and I'm sure from many more, will be the basis on how we can develop not alone just a planetarium here in Cahersiveen, but one of the best in the world. This week, UCC has provided 8 new telescopes for the students here in Coláiste and Sceilge to experiment with. And that's a wonderful gift. And I hope the students can gain not alone the experience, but the enjoyment of looking at the skies in an area that's very, very special, as indeed I enjoyed as a young person, looking into the skies with a telescope. Mightn't be the best in the world, but it brought things a little bit nearer. The galaxies, there is so much enjoyment to be got for it, and that's why Coláiste and Sceilge are leading the way. Start with the students, start with the young people, and I know this is going to be a wonderful project, and congratulations to everyone that have brought it this far, and we will be all there to help. Thank you.
Thanks very much to the Mayor. And to bridge the gap now between, I suppose, the fact that we're in the school, education is very important. For a short introduction, I'd like to ask Professor John O'Halloran from UCC. John is the Vice President for Teaching and Learning. He's also the Professor of Zoology in UCC. And more importantly, he has a house out in Ballinskelligs and he's a regular visitor here. So John has a great grow for the area. So John was one of the key guys in making this happen. So John, you just say a few words. Thanks.
Thank you.
Maybe this side, John.
Great. Yeah, that way. Great. Good morning, everybody. I'm not sure standing up after that Kerry phrase and winning football and all of that is actually a happy place for a Cork man to be, but certainly it's an absolute privilege. Can I also say, for me personally, to be here, who has a place in Ballinskelligs, who actually just loves being here, to be somewhere special. But also the symbolism that John O'Connor is hosting this today is really, really important to me, as someone who's particularly involved in education. I think to walk in the footsteps of our students, this is our parish from UCC and CIT. You may not see it like that. We certainly see it like that. Some of our students have come out of the school, some of our finest students. In fact, I can say one of my best PhD students who did her doctoral with me, Maura McCarthy, came out of the school. She's only over the road in Emlochmore, and she's now a superb scientist. So for me to walk in those footsteps of the students that have actually walked in your school, John, that you should be really proud of, because we are really proud of them when they come to us, is a privilege for me. I also have the privilege of chairing the BT Young Scientist panel in the RDS, which I will do, and I do for the last 14 years in January every year. And I've seen young people coming from here on a wet, cold January 6th, January 7th. Santa is gone, all the excitement of Christmas has passed, and these young people leave the school. I know it takes 2.5 hours to get to Cork, so even another 3 or 4 hours after that. Probably takes 6 hours to get from here to the RDS. Young people, probably 14 or 15 years of age, carrying the pride of this parish, this school and this region to Dublin, and standing and defending their piece of science and their piece of research. That gives me great pride, and it should give you great pride. So it's a really special day for me to be here with you on this very special occasion. The man that makes this possible is the man on my left here, because he does work over in Dingle, and I said to him, there is another part of Kerry, and you must come over here. And then, of course, so we brought him across. We brought him across in a boat the first time to Valencia. I think he came by road this morning, but Brendan is a distinguished alumnus of our university, and we are really proud that he once again is playing a critical role here today. 3 weeks ago, I was in Shanghai. I'll be in Shanghai on Thursday next again. I looked up at the sky, and to my surprise, I could see stars. In Shanghai, 5,000, 6,000 miles away. They're the same stars that we see here in the sky tonight. We share a world, we share a place that's special to each of us, and we owe it to ourselves and the planet to be responsible for that. But for me, what motivates me is that I come here all year round. I see some of our graduates having to leave this parish, to leave different parts where there's no employment. I see people, some of our graduates traveling the world. It's good to travel, but I think it's good for them to have an opportunity to come back. So come with the joy of having a dark sky is a responsibility. Responsibility for all of us that the Mayor has already said, but the responsibility from our point of view is the educational one, to position ourselves to give the best opportunity for our young people, and not so young people actually. And UCC, just to give you an idea, we have 109 centres across the country on adult continuing education programmes, including here and in Waterville. So we are kind of used to this, but we also recognise how important it is. So I today will commit UCC, and Paul Callan, my colleague, I come out into parishes like this, and then I go back to the university, and then I say, God, who am I going to get to come down to Kerry? And I went to Paul Callan and Niall Smith from CIT. We have a very close relationship with our colleagues in CIT, and I can tell you they didn't need any convincing, and you'll see why, because these are incredibly talented people who are also committed to education in the same way. So I'm really pleased to be here to hear what's going to happen. I'm also intrigued about the Brecon Beacons. I spent 2 years in the Brecon Beacons. The people that were speakers probably don't even know that. I spent 2 years at University of Wales in Cardiff. I'm a field biologist, so I spent a lot of time out at night catching birds on the bridges. And those of you that don't know the Brecon Beacons, it's where the SAS train. So you can imagine in the 1980s, with an Irish registered car, in the middle of the Brecon Beacons, with a head torch and camouflage at night, going under bridges, in a training area for the SAS. Now that was pretty foolish maybe, but I suppose what it goes to show that all of us are committed to doing things that are important, and I will repeat our commitment from UCC together with our partners at CIT to work with you in a way that's meaningful for you and work in partnership to developing something special. So I look forward to hearing today. Brendan, thank you, and thank you all for coming. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, well, let's get down to the business of the day then. I hope this thing works now, because I have all this presentation stuff on this. The first two speakers we're having will be from UCC, Paul Cullen. Paul is Professor of Physics, but Astrophysics in particular, and he has a long, distinguished record, so I'm not going to go over that. What I'm going to do is put up the presentation, and we get underway immediately with Paul.
So I think Niall and myself are going to split this, thanks John, over the next 40 minutes or so, and should closer to the mic. Thank you. And what I'm going to do is to start off talking about astronomy, but to use it in a way to try to tell you a little bit about the heritage that we have in astronomy in Ireland. And along the way, tell you a little bit about some of the basic, simple kind of astronomy that can be done from here on using a dark sky. And then after that, I'm going to say a little bit about the role of dark sky reserves, and give you a little information that has been shared with us from colleagues in New Zealand who have a very successful dark sky reserve there. And so to start off, you know, Ireland has a very long tradition in astronomy, of course. Starting back, you could almost say to Newgrange, and the construction of Newgrange and many of the stone circles in Ireland have an astronomical orientation that is quite amazing for the time of their construction, so many thousands of years ago. Following on from that then, astronomy in Ireland really got a tremendous boost by the development in Birr in the early 1800s of the largest telescope in the world. Ireland has a history of being a world leader in astronomy, believe it or not. This telescope was built by the third Earl, Lord Ross, nicknamed locally the Birr Leviathan, and it's actually in very good working order even today. You can see the way it works. It has a mirror in it that's about maybe 6 feet in size or so, at the end of a very, very long tube. On the image you can actually see people there taking pictures of it. And Lord Ross used this huge mirror to make observations of the universe that were unrivaled at the time. He tried to address several different types of fundamental issues in astronomy, and one of them was the nature of the so-called nebulae. Now, these nebulae are gaseous balls of gas and dust in the universe, a little bit like some of the images you can see here, and we should acknowledge these are really excellent pictures by some of the students here as well. Artistic interpretations, I guess you might say, of galaxies and planets and nebulae, etc. in the universe. But at the time of Lord Ross, the nature of many of these nebulae and galaxies was very uncertain. Nobody knew if they were in our own galaxy or if they were outside of our galaxy in more distant parts of the universe. And one of the great discoveries by Lord Ross was that if you looked at some of these nebulae in detail, instead of being these kind of diffuse blobs of gas, they turned out to have structure. In this case, he drew this particular one of the Whirlpool galaxy while perched at the very top of his telescope on a cold night in Birr, and realized, and many people realized, that what he had actually drawn was another galaxy. And so Lord Ross was the first, and provided some of the first pieces of information that made us realize that in fact the galaxy that we're in, our own Milky Way, isn't the only galaxy in the universe. And in fact there are many, many other galaxies in the universe. And we now know there are hundreds of thousands of millions of galaxies in the universe, each one containing hundreds of thousands of millions of stars. But the first strong bit of evidence that we had that was true was from the observations made by Lord Rosse. And so this was a demonstration, a great technological innovation at the time, and the telescope remained the largest telescope in the world for more than 70 years in the middle of Ireland. Now, moving on from that then, Lord Rosse had several sons, and one of them became particularly well known, Charles Parsons. Parsons had seen his father building the telescope and doing the astronomy, but also doing the engineering and the scientific research that goes into building a facility like that. And although Charles obviously was, I'm sure, captivated by astronomy of the heavens, he was more interested in the engineering that was involved in it. And so he went off and became an engineer, and he developed the first steam turbine engine, which revolutionized industry at the time. And there's an image here of one of his first steam turbines, and then a ship that he built, the Turbinia, which was the first one powered by an engine like this. And nowadays, practically all ships use these engines, and these engines are also used by the vast majority of power stations. And so this was a technology developed by an engineer who himself had been inspired by astronomy as a child, seeing his dad do it. And so it's one of the stories we like to tell of the inspirational part of astronomy, how astronomy is so good at getting people interested in the sciences, and maybe from that into engineering and other areas also, okay? And so astronomy has a very important role in education, and I'll go back to talk about that a little bit later. Now, around the same time, another very important Irish astronomer, and here we're talking about the late 1800s, early 1900s, was someone called Howard Grubb. And Grubb was interested not only in doing fundamental astronomy, but also again in building the best telescopes in the world. And he had works in Dublin, and there he built hundreds of telescopes for observatories all around the world, all of them the most advanced and the most technologically well prepared of their time. There were very few in the world who could rival his expertise. And he made millions. He employed hundreds of people in the late 1800s, early 1900s doing this. There's an image here of his works in Dublin where they not only made the telescopes themselves, but they also made the mirrors for the telescopes. And also, again, because he was good at making these kinds of things, he also developed patents for gun sights and made the first periscope. And so, again, it's another example of how astronomy can be used to develop skills that can be used in other kind of areas as well. And he remains, to this day, probably the best maker of scientific instruments that we ever had in Ireland. Okay? And he made, the company that he founded made a variety of telescopes around the world. Here's just a few. The one on the upper left there is the Great Telescope in Vienna. That dome is about 45 feet in size, 45 feet in size. It can be moved by one person, and it houses one of the biggest refracting telescopes of its type at the time. And you can go and still see that today in Vienna. The other observatory here is one, of course, that's dear to many of us. This is an observatory the observatory in UCC, also built by Grubb, and has a variety of instruments in it that he made, again going back about 100 years or so. And that's open to the public, and we take about between 5,000 and 10,000 visitors through it every year. But the other thing too is that the company that he founded kept making telescopes all the way through up to the mid-1980s. And their final telescope was the one here on the lower left on La Palma in the Canary Islands. And then that was the last telescope the company built, and they stopped producing it. But again, an important example of an astronomer in Ireland who had a major effect on the development of astronomy internationally. and really helped people address some of the most important scientific questions of the time. Now, there are a series of other observatories in Ireland. Ryan's going to tell you about Blackrock Castle Observatory after me. So I thought I'd just focus maybe on some of the kind of historical ones. The one on the upper left is Dunsink Observatory in Dublin, which is about 200 years old or so. The one on the right, upper right, is Armagh Observatory. The lower one then is the Burr Castle and the telescope which I mentioned earlier on. And so these are the kind of the oldest historical observatories that we have on the island, so to speak. At the time, astronomy had a range of different things it was trying to do. One was to try to address the nature of the universe, the nature of the nebulae, the nature of the galaxies. But astronomy also had some economic benefit. Astronomy, for example, played a large role in navigation around the world, because it turns out that if you have an accurate map of the stars on the sky, that map can help you in navigating. And for the ships of the largest navies in the world, being able to find their way around the oceans was very important. And so for that reason, many of the large navies had large observatories near the harbours, which were used to make the astronomical observations required for navigation. Astronomy was also important at the time for actually measuring the local time very accurately. Clocks weren't very good in the mid-1800s, even towards the later 1800s. And so astronomical observations of the stars were used very commonly to measure local time as accurately as possible. And for example, there's the story of the bank manager no, it's not in Kerry, but in Skibbereen in the late 1800s, who was an avid amateur astronomer. And he would use his telescope to measure the time in Skibbereen locally, and then he'd go into the bank, and on the window of the bank there was a clock, and he'd adjust the clock to the time that he'd made with his telescope, and then everybody in Skib knew what the local time was in Skibbereen from his astronomical observations. And so astronomy has that history of practical application for navigation and for measuring time. And in that context, it's great that this initiative of the dark skies also gives astronomy a chance to give something back to the community. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on too. I thought I'd mention in a few slides as well some of the modern research that we do in Ireland in astronomy, and I'll just do this by way of some pretty pictures. There are several people, for example, in Ireland today, some based in some of the observatories I was showing you, some based in other universities on the island, who study objects like this. These are stars that explode. And when they explode, for the few seconds they explode, they outshine everything else in the universe. All the galaxies, all the light from all the galaxies put together, these things for a few seconds outshine everything. And they are probably some of the most extreme objects that you could possibly imagine. And there are many people, astronomers in Ireland, who study these using a variety of different telescopes, not only from the ground, but also from space, and I'll talk about that in a second as well. Another thing that many astronomers are concerned with here in Ireland is studying how planets form around stars. It's one of the greatest achievements of astronomy over the last 20 or 30 years that we've actually found planets orbiting other stars. We know of more than 1,000 planets now orbiting other stars. If you'd said to an astronomer 30 years ago that we would know that today, they would not have believed you. But we've been able, by using a few very clever techniques, to actually find these planets. And we know that the way that these planets are formed is that if you have a star, and if you choose some example of a star on one of these images here, that star eventually was formed from a large cloud of gas that was collapsed under its own weight. And in the center of that cloud the star was made. And from the remaining gas, the kind of debris left behind, planets form. And these planets form from this remaining material, which is actually in the form of a disk. So there's a disk orbiting around this star, and in this disk planets form. It's the way planets form in other planetary systems, and it's the way the Earth formed here in the solar system too. And the wonderful thing is we can see these disks. This is an image taken in the radio of one of these disks where planets are actually being formed. And the little gaps, and I've been told to stay standing here, but I'm getting so frustrated, I'm going to start moving around a little bit. The gaps that you can see in these disks, in this picture of this disk, are actually the trails left by the planets orbiting the star as they go around it. So we can see planets being formed, we can see stars being formed, and we can actually find these planets more directly even orbiting other stars. And again, this is another area that several astronomers in Ireland are actually pursuing at the moment. We make our observations using ground-based telescopes, but we also make lots of our observations from satellites. I won't go into why satellites provide us with information that really is impossible from the ground. Oh dear. Be close to the microphone. Oh, okay, so.
There's another one. Why don't you come over to this side, Paul?
Yes.
Come over to this side. Come around this way.
Okay.
We'll take the mic that way. So can you come around this side?
Yes.
Yeah. And you can do that and then that.
Perfect. Okay. Do that and then that. Thank you. Thanks, Paul. That's okay. That's okay. So there are several satellites that have been launched. You would have heard of the Hubble Space Telescope, for example. People are happy in the back now. Very good. And that looks at a particular type of radiation from stars, but there are lots of other types of radiation that we're interested in finding as well. And so there are hundreds probably of different types of astronomical satellites that are orbiting the Earth, taking data that many Irish astronomers use today as well. Now, as far as the future is concerned of astronomy, one of the things that we're trying to pursue is to see if we can build a big telescope here in Ireland. And so there is a proposal, a suggestion, that we build a large radio telescope in Burr in County Offaly. And if this was built, it would be a huge astronomical facility that would actually be in the middle of Ireland. And we're I suppose, optimistic that this will actually happen. But we'll see how things go. But look out for that on the news in a little while. And further on then, as you might imagine, in studying these stars and these planets, the more information we get, the more we can find out about them. And so that means, ideally, we need to build bigger and bigger telescopes. And so there's a plan, for example, for a telescope to be built in Chile. It would be no good in Ireland, especially on a day like today. But in Chile, where the skies are very clear and where the atmosphere is particularly calm and you get beautiful images of stars, telescopes with mirrors in them, maybe 40 meters. Can you imagine a mirror the size of this floor in a telescope? Okay? And there are plans to build these telescopes, and it's something that Irish astronomers would really hope to be able to use to further their research in years to come. Maybe just one slide on the teaching of astronomy in Ireland. There's a little bit of astronomy in primary school. There's a little bit more in secondary school. The new junior cert syllabus will have a little bit of space and the Earth in it. For transition year, there are a few options. We often get transition year students in working with us in UCC, and I'm sure Niall would have them in Blackrock Castle. There's a transition year module in astronomy that they can do. And it's also possible to use telescopes remotely. That secondary school students can actually use telescopes in a wide variety of different places in the world from their own PCs and get their own images of galaxies, etc., and look at them and play with them. And so this is something, it's a great facility that we're trying to encourage as many students as possible to use, and I know Niall will talk about some of that in the context of Blackrock Castle too. And then we have various degree programs, etc. And And of course then from an outreach point of view, astronomy is extremely popular, and Astronomy Ireland, for example, is a very, very large organisation and a very popular one that promotes astronomy overall. Astronomy actually has a relevance for the economy, etc., but maybe I'd like to just kind of skip over that. Now I'd like to just spend a minute or two, and I know we're already well behind schedule here. Brendan is looking nervously at me here. Just to kind of tie this in with the International Dark Sky and Astrotourism. So, you know, Astrotourism, to me, is just a unique way that, again, astronomy, and we're not talking about very complicated astronomy, we're talking about a very simple knowledge of the night sky, okay? Non-technical. But that simple knowledge can really be used to the benefit, the economic benefit of a local community. That's the first thing, okay? So, I mean, it's nice knowing about the history of it, as I've talked about here, but from the point of view of using astronomy for the night sky, you don't need, you know, a very kind of detailed background. Now, the International Dark Sky Association then, of course, has initiated this program that, you know, will be well known to many of you now. A program of conservation which recognizes the areas where the sky is particularly dark, and they use this word of excellent stewardship of the night sky, which I think is very appropriate. The Dark Sky Association then can classify various parks and reserves in terms of how dark it really is. And of course, if you have a particularly dark reserve, as you have here in Kerry, there is very considerable tourist potential for that, which we'll talk about in just one second. It was, you know, as has been alluded to by the Mayor already, a fantastic achievement to have the Dark Sky award made here, and particularly the gold tier status, which is relatively rare, but it's becoming less so. This is from the International Dark Sky Association web pages. This is a list of their reserves and their parks. Now, Kerry is in there as a reserve. From what I can see, the difference between the reserves and the parks is one basically of scale, and I don't think much else. But the thing to note that if you're using the Kerry Dark Sky as a gold tier reserve, and you're saying it's really special relative to all the other reserves and parks in the world, there are at least 2 gold tiered parks already in the UK, okay? And that's going to continue. More of these special parks, because everybody, or lots of people, will be applying for this special status. And so the unique selling point of the area here, you know, is going to kind of degrade over time. And so it's an indication that if something is to be done to promote it here, it really should be done quickly. There's a timeliness element to this. An example of a very successful dark sky reserve is this one in New Zealand, the Aotearoa Mackenzie International Dark Sky Reserve. This is about 6 times bigger than the reserve here, and indeed has already partnered with the reserve here in Kerry. I've had a little bit of contact with some of the people there via a mutual contact in Canterbury, and one of them emailed me a few days ago and said that the growth of the astrotourism industry, if you like, in this park in New Zealand has never looked back. The interest in astronomy is growing rapidly, and they can't keep up with it. They can't keep up with it. You need a sound business structure, and with paid staff, including trained astronomy guides and good astronomy equipment. Okay? So marketing is critical as well. But they have 25,000 visitors per year into this park. Okay? Now, a lot of those visitors are coordinated by a company that was set up, Earth and Sky, which is set up in cooperation with the University of Canterbury. That cooperation is important because the university has an observatory there, and that also acts as a draw to the tourists into the area. And that company employs 50 or 60 people. It started off with a half dozen 10 years ago, now 50 or 60 people, okay, in this company that drives astrotourism in this region. The founder of that company, Gray Murray, started the initiative to seek the long-term protection of our most precious asset. Okay? And a place where travellers from every corner of the world to come and see, view, learn, experience the night sky, and hopefully return to do the same again. We've had about 1 million people visit the reserve in New Zealand. And it's had an impact, this increased tourism has had an impact locally. The local town of Lake Tekapo, initially with a population of 375, school numbers in decline. Okay? It's now one of the most expensive places to get accommodation in New Zealand because of this, $200 a night. Okay? With high occupancy, and they're about to build 2 hotels there because of this. Yeah. They're getting considerable interest from this. John mentioned China earlier on, from tourists in China and Japan. And seeing the dark skies in New Zealand now is actually a more popular thing. Some of the surveys indicate it's even a more popular thing to do than going to see the glaciers in New Zealand or any of their other kind of more famous physical attractions. So it's becoming a major tourist draw as far as New Zealand is concerned. Now, as far as the situation here is concerned, we've got to be realistic. It mightn't scale up to anything like as good as the experience in New Zealand. But it demonstrates, nonetheless, that there is the strongest potential for it here in Kerry. And as Brendan says, the important thing is just to figure out how best to develop that and move it forward, okay, to the benefit, the economic benefit of the local community. Okay. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Benefit of a lecturer like Paul. Paul won a number of awards over the years for his lecturing capability. He could go on, I think, for another hour or two. So, no, that's not a criticism, Paul. I could listen. But I think the key message for me, though, is the one of urgency and the fact that the uniqueness isn't going to be there forever. Okay, let's pull up the next speaker is Niall Smith, Dr. Niall Smith from CIT, from Cork Institute of Technology. Niall is also an astrophysicist, unfortunately from UCD, though. And with that, Niall set up and is running the Blackrock Castle Observatory. So, Niall, thanks. I would point out, by the way, that CIT and Institute of Technology in Tralee are in the process of amalgamating to form the Munster Technological University. So there's actually a very strong link between CIT and Kerry now. Paul, I don't know which side you want to go.
I'll try to stay in the middle on this occasion. So thank you very much, Brendan. Thanks, Paul, for giving the background. I'm going to try to give almost a case study of some of the things that we've done. So because it's a case study, everything that we've learned doesn't necessarily be applicable to what we've seen or what we could see here in Kerry. But I think the key thing is we're really willing to share. We've already tried to do that and really looked and had a fantastic time so far talking with locals. There's such enthusiasm, and enthusiasm is really important at the start of a project. Motivation is really important at the start of a project, but there does come a time when that needs to work into a kind of a business plan of some sort. And I wanted just to point out that back in 2002, Blackrock Castle was a derelict site. There was no visitors. It had just been built or bought over by the city council from a company for $1 million. Because it had been left derelict, the place was in a really bad state of affairs. And at the time, of course, the Irish economy was doing, we thought at least, reasonably well. So we made a proposal to the city manager at the time to convert the castle into a science centre with an observatory, assuming that the city and the city manager would say, well, no, we'll put a restaurant and we'll put a cafe or a hotel, and we'll also put in an art gallery, because that's kind of what you do with castles. Although, as Paul has pointed out, some of the best astronomy and the best science in the country has come actually out of castles in Ireland in the past, or people associated with them. I have to be honest, to our surprise, the opportunity was seen and seized by, in particular, the city manager at the time. And a lesson there is that you need 1 or 2 people who are really willing to drive it. You need a lot of people to support it, but you need 1 or 2 people who have influence, who are really there to drive it. So by 2006, the place looked very different, and these are some pictures just of the last day or so, of the last couple of weeks. And today, the observatory, which was derelict, is an internationally award-winning science centre. We opened in 2007, and we are a strategic partner for Science Foundation Ireland, which means that Science Foundation Ireland want to try to use a couple of sites, I think now this is the 5th one around the country, in order to drive the scientific agenda amongst the general public. So castles can have an effect. So my kind of feeling is astronomy rocks, and astronomy can do good things if it's properly managed and if you take control of it and you work on the product. And it is a product and it is a business, and just as we're very clear, in case I don't get to say it later on in the conversation, we are a business. This pays people's mortgages. We employ in total between part-time and full-time over 30 people, and then we have an on-site restaurant which is a franchise which has a similar number of people. So you go from a derelict site to a site that has roughly 60 people employed at various levels of remuneration, and that's all driven by the idea of effectively now what we're calling astrotourism. So in general, BCO, about 30,000 science visitors directly into the centre, 20,000 through outreach. It's probably more. There's always an argument about, for example, if you stand in the middle of O'Connell Street and 1 million people walk by, did you actually reach 1 million people? We say no. So the 20,000 is people that we feel we have impact on, so people that we've talked to or in some way interact with a presentation or something like that. But that number, if you want to quote it, could just go up to any silly number. We don't like silly numbers. But there's a further 70,000 visits the courtyard and the cafe. So out in the courtyard, we bring some science into the courtyard. So if you're just going for your cup of coffee and you're really no interest in science this morning because you're just not in a good mood, but nevertheless there's a little bit of science and you go away and you didn't even realise that you had been inculcated with some science. So we can be sneaky when it needs be. So there's over 100,000 people. In fact, I think last year we reckon there was 107,000 people came to the castle. So I go back to 2002, nobody going there at all. By 2015, we have over 100,000 people. We like education, it's a huge part of what we do. So school children over the years, we go out with workshops, things like the planetarium. We try to make those workshops directly relevant to the teachers. That's a really important point for us. We really enjoyed working with the primary school children yesterday, and looking forward to closer ties, John, with Coláiste and Sceilge. And we are approved to provide continuing professional development to teachers to use space in the classroom. All of these things can be brought as part of the conversation for the Kerry Dark Sky Reserve. We're delighted to explore and examine how that might help here locally, because these things have to be local. And I'm going to give you an example, and I'd almost say if we were in a meeting, I'd say don't minute this, but it's being recorded, so it's going to be minuted. But we have to be very careful when we talk about national centres. To me, they're a national centre for science, or national science and discovery centres, or national astronomy centres shouldn't be in one location. They need to be distributed and they need to be networked. So what we actually need are things in communities, in localities, and then bring them together. So we deal with Cork primarily. It is less likely that people from Coláiste and Sceilge or Cahersiveen are going to spend the 2.5 hours to come to Blackrock on a regular basis. So we need things in the locality to help to drive that in the locality. The issue then is, can we all work together to actually make added value from the network of those? And I think we can. I think actually that's why we're here today already, is to do that. So at Blackrock, we have a number of objectives. We're really interested in science, technology, engineering and maths. We want to help kids and John O'Halloran mentioned the young and the not so young to understand the role of science in society. Because there's business opportunities where you mightn't expect them in the areas that people might have called science. I'm not really going to go into those today, but maybe when we're in the open discussion we might have a chance to talk a little bit more about that. We want to reach directly into the classroom. So we're fully aware that lots of schools around the country already exist. But as a science centre, we love when people come to us, but we also have to go to you. That's really important. And we want to make sure that the general public understand the importance of science. Because it's really important that if the general public, no more than people like myself who don't play football like to watch it, I like a little bit of understanding of how the football works. I want the general public to have a little bit of understanding about how science works. I don't expect everybody to become a Premiership footballer, and I don't expect everybody to become a world-leading scientist. But let's not think negatively towards it. So we need the public to think in positive terms. You don't need to know lots about stuff to enjoy it and to be an advocate for it. This is the one graph that I'm going to show, because educating young, so yesterday John O'Connor mentioned we had 120 and we'll have another 120 primary school kids. All the evidence from research suggests that if you want to influence people, you need to start young. So I think it's fair to say that CIT and UCC understand this increasingly, and we see our role as reaching right back into the start of the education process. If we were being really cynical, and we're not, of course, really cynical at all, we'd say that we want good students coming to us in 15 years' time. So it's important to us to start now with the kids who are 5, 6 and 7 years old. In fact, we deal at BCO with kindergartens, because all the evidence shows that the biggest impact starts when you start young. So one of the things that you can do as part of a dark sky reserve is you can be an advocate in the locality or in the region for this. So the tourism is important, but so is the education. And if you link the two together, you gain the thought processes of different government departments. And by spreading it out, you diversify your funding opportunities, the funding lines that you can look towards, and you have a rationale for it, and it's a consistent argument. That's what we've tried to do at Blackrock Castle. Parents are really important, of course, as well. Parents, it goes back to the Premiership football comment. If parents don't at least speak in a positive way when Johnny or Mary brings home these pictures and says, that's really good, even if they really don't know what they're trying to show, but if they show enthusiasm, that's really important. So we need people not to be intimidated by science, because usually when we're intimidated, we kind of get a little bit defensive, because we really worry that our kids are going to ask us a question to which we don't know the answer. And we need to realise that's okay in science, because you know what? The reason why most of us who are involved in science got involved is we want to answer the questions to which there aren't answers at the moment. We actually don't want to know all the facts. I think that's true, Paul, isn't it? I mean, it's good to know some facts, absolutely. But it's then, like Paul was saying, well, these exploding stars, how do they work? I mean, brighter than the entire universe? No, that's got to be interesting. So that's challenging as well. So this is what we want to get across, the idea that it's fun, it's challenging, and it is challenging, and it's challenging, but challenge is good. Just to briefly say that one of the things that we also do at Blackrock, so we're a very small observatory, and Paul mentioned some of the great observatories. We don't claim to be a great observatory in terms of our scientific output, but we do have a scientific output, and we build stuff, I think is probably the best way of putting it. But the reason why we like building stuff is that we can use that stuff and the data that it generates to help kids to see how to work with data. And we probably all hear about big data and data analytics and all of that. It's become a very buzzword. Well, actually, astronomers have been way ahead of the curve there for a long time, because we've always generated lots of data. And it's complex data, and it's data to which is unlocking some of the secrets of the universe, and we really don't understand it. So you have to work hard to do that. So we can connect kids to real world data. And I think this is just the point that, again, coming back to the Dark Sky Reserve here, kids are used to working in virtual worlds. They can look at the night sky in supreme detail on their iPad. They can zoom in to the centers of black holes. They can travel across millennia, except they're not. They're just looking at different colors on a screen. The reality is that a dark sky brings the real universe to you, and we need to get across even issues like it can be cloudy in the real universe, it can be wet in the real universe. These are not necessarily negative type things. So bringing reality into the whole process is something that you can do in a site like this. And I wanted to mention one thing about education. We took some images on the right here on the screen. Sorry, there's a flat line. So there's a graph with a flat line, a red flat line going through it. If you try to look at some of the cases, for example, where we know that planets pass in front of stars. So when the planet passes in front of the star, it blocks out a bit of the light. So if you use standard techniques, you see on the left there just a jumble. So it is your right, isn't it? Yeah. No, it's your left. God, it's very confusing. It's my right, so it must be your left. Told you science was challenging, so I was presenting. So it's a flat line. But if you use a technique that we developed at Blackrock, you can see you get the result on the right, and you can clearly see a dip in the data. But that's not really what I want to get across. That data was analysed by a transition year student that we had with us. So we threw the data at him and said, here's a technique, can you find something interesting in it? Now, this isn't publishable quality, but my goodness, that's really helping the kids to get a view of the whole scientific process. We also work with others, and this is the thing about the Dark Sky Reserve. You've got to work with everybody who gives you a competitive edge. So, for example, there's a 32-metre radio dish down in Middleton. It's an amazing piece of technology. It's from another era. It was used to transmit international telephone lines during the 60s. You could transmit up to 49 simultaneous telephone calls across the Atlantic with a dish that's basically 100 feet across. So nowadays kids would laugh at that, of course, but you can actually now retrofit it. It just sticks up in the air, so you put a detector on the end of it and you look for neutral hydrogen. So the universe is full of hydrogen, and you just let the sky cross over your telescope, and those peaks are as clouds pass over the telescope, as in hydrogen clouds way off in space, you detect hydrogen and so on and less. And so you can get kids, so this is a map drawn by kids from Coláiste in Cork. They're a secondary school, very similar so to yourselves in Coláiste and Sceilge, and they found that that hydrogen isn't distributed evenly in the universe. Some places it's more and some places others, and they get to go to a 100-foot dish and all the rest. And of course you can do a bit of fun with it, so we had a naming competition for the dish, and we had an astronaut, Greg Johnson, who presented the Rebecca with a trophy for the winner. It was the let's say the quality. If you're thinking of having a competition to name things, just be a little bit careful. We didn't have the greatest. This was the Cork Observatory Radio Yoke, was actually what Corey stands for. So, but Corey sounded good. Anyway, it was just a bit of fun. But what we got them to think about in naming things, for example, was obviously, why would you name it that? What's it trying to do, and so on. Very, very quickly, because I'm aware of our time, just about bringing space into school. And Paul mentioned that there's lots of opportunities now to actually do observing from the classroom, or in our case from Blackrock Castle. And we use a series of telescopes across the globe to do this. So we started off with a small telescope in California. We have one in Blackrock, but it's often clouded out. We are installing a small one in India, and recently we have introduced a slightly larger one. So 1 meter one means the mirror is 1 meter across. By professional standards, that's a small telescope, but it actually gives you some superb views. Most of the telescopes we use are very small. They're 6-inch telescopes. In fact, the picture there shows you the dome and the telescope from which we can actually access. And if the data, and I'll give you just very briefly one or two of the pictures that were taken from those, and I'll link that back to the Dark Sky Reserve in just a second. But you can see there's 3 red dots, one in Cork, one in India, and one in California. And that means that, for example, if you're observing from Ireland, it's because California is 8 hours behind, it's dark there, so you get live viewing of the nighttime skies in California from Cork, or India's 5.5 hours ahead, so at different times of the year it's more appropriate to switch to the Indian one. But really importantly, we're linking cultures here as well as science data. So we're getting kids in Cork to talk to kids in California, and kids in California to talk to kids in India. And there's a kind of a thing called makerspace, which is the idea of bringing groups together, global makerspace, making things, getting kids to make things. So we always say, well, we've been getting kids to make images now for a number of years using astronomy, because again, Paul mentioned it, I think Brendan mentioned it, John mentioned it, I think we've all mentioned it so far. We're all under the one sky, and if we're all in the northern hemisphere, it's only a matter of a few hours when somebody over there sees the same stars you just saw a few minutes ago. So we are all part of the one universe. We may have different views on this planet, but culturally, the catalyst for the conversation is that we're all part of the same cosmos. Now, we interpret it culturally, we interpret our heritage, we interact with it differently, and that's part of the dynamism and the colour and the essence of the conversation. So again, Paul mentioned about the partnering with the Dark Sky Reserve in New Zealand. So I'd be saying, well, don't just talk about dark skies, talk about how does your education work? Talk about why do Maoris do these silly dances? I mean, they're not silly dances, of course, they're hakas, but you have a context for starting that discussion. And the dark sky is the context for starting that discussion. So that's what gives you the link between the two. These are just a couple of examples of images taken by the kids. On the bottom right is art. Some of the kids aren't that interested in science. They come, they use the telescope. You know what? It doesn't really get them going. So that's okay, because we're not trying to brainwash kids. We're trying to get them inspired. But if they're really interested in art, and that's fantastic. So what sometimes they do is they take, for example, the image on the bottom right, they take a colour red, a colour green, colour blue. Ordinarily we'd ask them to align them really nicely so that it would show a beautiful picture, but here they decided not to align them, and then they come up with a really artistic output. Fantastic. Here's astronomy, getting them to think about art. That art can go up on the wall. We would love to display, by the way, John, these pictures at Blackrock Castle. We love the idea of showing to the general public what kids do. And one thing that science centres do actually, and you can do this locally again, is you don't know who's going to pop in. So it can be anybody from any part of the world, and they come and they think, oh, that's what kids in Ireland do. And you wouldn't believe the conversations that catalyses. Because when you go and you invite people, not today because you're inviting anybody from the locality, but often you work and you think, who will I invite? So by definition, you don't know who you don't know to invite. Whereas centres that are open to the public encourage that sort of invitation, because you just say, I don't care where you come from, come in, and your story may be very interesting and we might be very interested to talk to you. You need to do some things that grab the imagination. So Paul mentioned again about the first mover advantage and the fact that other people are copying on to the fact that dark skies exist elsewhere. If there's the gold tier and if there's the silver tier, does the public really get the difference? So you have to be very careful about how you pitch and all of that. You may know it because you're immersed in it, but the people to whom you're responding to, that you're marketing to, aren't immersed in it. So they need a clarity on why yours should be the destination rather than somebody else's. One of the things that we did, so you try to look at really exciting things to do with them. So we got a bunch of kids from who were working for us under a thing called Coder Dojo, and there was the inaugural flight from Dublin to San Francisco, and Cork happens to be twinned with San Francisco, so we got them to take pictures using the Tara telescope, controlling it live using the Wi-Fi on the Aer Lingus flight. Now, and technically that's relatively trivial nowadays, but nobody had done that before, so it got us a lot of good press, and the kids loved the idea that when they were flying 35,000, 40,000 feet above the Atlantic, that they were able to take pictures of a galaxy. Almost finally, in terms of the images, this was a picture we got with, again, some of our kids from secondary school in Regina Mundi, which is the girls' school in Cork, and they took pictures of Comet Hartley. It's going to disappear off the edge there. So they just took a series of pictures and made a little video about it. Very simple stuff, but has huge impact on what you can do. And the word real data. We think it's really important. Virtual data is everywhere. Virtual apps are everywhere. It's trivial. That's there. Don't try to compete with that, in my opinion, in our opinion. Bring something, bring the provenance, bring the reality. It's the same with the dark sky reserves. The last thing you want is to end up with loads and loads of pretty pictures that you try to distribute to everyone to say, this is what it looks. You want people to come and see it. So your objective is to do that, to bring people. But point out that it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing whether it's on a 6-inch tablet or a 600-inch fancy schmancy machine. It's your eyes or your telescope or your binoculars. Finally, just a couple of things in terms of developments where I think we can work with the Dark Sky Reserve. And I think in fairness, can I just say, we have IT Tralee, we have CIT and we have UCC. And we actually all work really well together. And we really want to see this working. So these are some thoughts. And I'm a great believer in throwing out thoughts. And if it's not appropriate, not inappropriate, but it's not appropriate, that's fine. But if you don't throw them out, then you don't catalyse the conversation. So very briefly, before Brendan gets too worried. So there will now be a National Space Week from 2016. So we have Maths Week, we have Engineers Week, we have Science Week. SFI have just recently agreed that to have Blackrock Castle, just in the last few days, coordinating a National Space Week and the intention to grow it over time. So that's a clear opportunity for us to work with you guys on doing something during National Space Week. And there will now be a National Space Week. There hasn't actually been one. There's been a World Space Week, but not a national one. Second thing is in 2017 we're going to have a huge number of the space science professionals coming to Cork for 9 weeks. We'd love to see opportunities. How can we bring them down here? How can we do something that highlights what they're doing and the Dark Sky Reserve? We've also done concept designs for very strange, not very strange, but for things that you mightn't imagine. So, for example, in Dunmanway, the swimming pool there is being revamped, and they wanted to put in some science into that. So we've done a concept design, and I don't know if all the money is got for that, but going back to the earlier comments about getting the money, that local community has worked hard. My understanding is they're very far along the way, but they asked us to use your experiences with dealing with the public to tell us if what we're trying to do can work. And finally, just in the last couple of months, Sceilge Ireland, thank you very much Declan, have given us what is the largest grant in Cork, second largest grant in the country, to bring the story of the ancient East. Now, of course, here we're on the Atlantic, the Wild Atlantic Way. Jeepers, I nearly forgot it. Apologies. So we're on the Wild Atlantic Way. I can't believe that. So we're on the Wild Atlantic Way here. Technically, Blackrock Castle or Cork is kind of at the interface between the ancient East, Ireland's ancient East, and the Wild Atlantic Way. So we said, look, there's a story to be told, but also let's use STEM and science to help to tell that story, because that makes it unique. The comment that came back to us is Blackrock is not just another castle. We would be very happy to talk with you about bringing STEM and that into any applications that you might be thinking of generating. And that's really then a potted history of where we've come from in Blackrock. And I guess the key thing is delighted to be here, delighted to be part of any conversations, and also delighted to be part of or not to be part of the conversations that you don't think we need to be part of. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so Dr. Michael Connolly, the county archaeologist, background, as I said, one of the living experts in this whole area. People like John Sheehan and others who speak very highly of Michael as well. So Michael's going to talk about archaeology and time. Michael.
Thank you. The first thing to say is I'm not an expert on archaeoastronomy. I thought this thing was supposed to...
put on a little hang mic, a little one here as well.
Yeah, that's supposed to work, yeah. Yeah, I'm not an expert on archaeoastronomy. The point is that there are very few experts on archaeoastronomy. And it's important, I suppose, to state from the start that in Ireland in particular, it's a niche area. It's not an area of great research. And even in Britain, there are very few people that would claim to be experts in archaeoastronomy. The reasons for that are another day's discussion, but Dr. Smith mentioned the virtual data and real data, and it's important to remember that a lot of the stuff that's on the internet, etc., about archaeoastronomy is unproven. But what we do know and what we can say for certain is that Professor Callanan mentioned time and the calculation of time and the use of astronomy in that area. And we can say for certain that that's probably where man's interest in astronomy began. The first slide you see here is in some ways, it's a cartoon, but in some ways it's probably a realistic enough idea of man's desire to understand time, and a desire we still have today, and probably that's where it began. But there were probably practical reasons as well. Sorry. Now, on this next slide here, you can see that prehistoric man would have had a need to understand a very basic division of time. The requirements to know when seasons change, if you go back to the earliest times, when animal breeding cycles occur and all this sort of thing. And when you begin with the idea of trying to calculate time, and then you calculate time probably by natural phenomena. These would be the movements of the sun, movements of the moon, tides, all of these sort of things. These natural phenomena are then seen as evidence of agency, agency, if you like, is an outside power greater than yourself that causes the sun to move, that causes the moon to change. And the next thing, you develop rituals around these natural phenomena, and you end up with a belief system. And basically, that's probably where it all began when looking at the skies in prehistory. Now, it's important to know what we're talking about from an archaeological perspective. In Ireland, these are basically the divisions of, if you like, archaeological and early historic time. The early Mesolithic, dating from about 8,000 to 6,000 BC. We have no evidence of any sites or habitation in the county from that time as yet. The late Mesolithic, from about 6,000 to 4,200 BC. We have the Mesolithic encampment at Ferreters Cove in the Dingle Peninsula, which is the earliest evidence in the county. And there are some radiocarbon dates got by the late Frank Mitchell on Valentia Island, which date to this period as well. The early Neolithic, we have a number of early Neolithic tombs in the county. Killiclahan, which I recently excavated near Milltown, is a portal tomb. We have a number of early Neolithic houses that have been excavated during the housing boom and all that of the Celtic Tiger. In the Dark Skies area, as yet, we have no solid evidence of Neolithic habitation, of early Neolithic habitation. Middle Neolithic, we have a passage tomb outside Tralee at Ballycarthy, of which there are probably more in the county. We have field systems, we have axes and arrowheads from that period. Within the Dark Skies area, there are a number of stone axes from the area, and there are numerous hilltop cairns which may contain tombs of the passage tomb type. These are normally situated on hilltops overlooking the sea. The late Neolithic, 3,100 to 2,500 BC, it's a time where beaker pottery comes into Ireland first. We have a number of finds of beaker pottery from the county. We have a few embanked enclosures and henge type structures in the north of Kerry, which probably date to this. In the Dark Skies area, it's possible that some of the 2 or 3 embanked circles in the area date to this period as well. The early Bronze Age dated from about 2,500 to 1,700 BC. Wedge tombs would be the most visible monument probably of this period. It's also a period where we have a number of metalworking finds. We have evidence of mining. The mine in Ross Island in Killarney, the earliest copper mine in northwestern Europe. And rock art very probably dates to this period as well. A number of these features are available in the Dark Skies area. Middle Bronze Age, in certain types of enclosures, circular houses, metalwork, burials, burnt mounds or phylloxera. Again, a number of these available in the Dark Skies area. Late Bronze Age, the types of monuments you're talking about are stone rows, stone circles, standing stones, hill forts, hilltop enclosures, promontory forts, including coastal promontory forts, possibly have their origins in this period. And again, a number of these are available in this area. Early Iron Age, hill forts, few artefacts, 1 or 2 possible burials. The Iron Age is a period very poorly represented in the southern half of Ireland. In many respects, we're not really sure what's happening at the time, and it may be that you have a continuation of the material from the earlier period into it. The late Iron Age, again, hill forts, burial, bog trackways. A lot of the wooden trackways that occur in bogs date to this period. Boundaries like the famous Black Pig's Dyke. You have one in North Kerry, the Red Ditch. Stag Fort within the Dark Skies area very possibly dates to this late Iron Age period. Early medieval, I mean, there are numerous early monastic and hermetic sites both in the county and within the Dark Skies area. Medieval, 800 to 1200, churches, Romanesque churches, military earthworks. You have this is the period of the arrival of the Normans and the continuation, say, of a Gaelic kingdom within the area of the Dark Skies. And in the late medieval, tower houses, fortified houses, gun forts, etc. Now, the need for a knowledge of time. Why would these various people, what would have driven them to try and, if you like, quantify time? In the earliest period in the Mesolithic, what you're basically talking about is a hunter-gatherer society. There are people who didn't stay in one place, that travelled around, following basically food resources. Pretty much the sort of lifestyle you get in some pre-Stone Age communities on islands in the Pacific and things like this. Now, why would they need to know about time? they're following seasonal food, so they need to know, say for instance, when salmon run, when certain resources are available in the sea, when is the time that, say, wild deer, etc., are going to be breeding, etc., and all these sort of things. So they follow this around. So they need to know different times of the year to follow certain food resources. Life and death. I mean, life and death was with us then, it's still with us now, and there is the whole idea, and it's common across all societies, why am I here and what happens when I'm gone? Weather, again, certain types of weather associated maybe with certain times of the year and all this sort of thing, and the better you can quantify this and when this might occur, the better chance you have to organise hunting and gathering cycles. And again, the idea that natural phenomena, if you have an eclipse or something like this that's visible to a man 8,000 years ago, this is a mystery, this is something that may be catastrophic. What does it mean? Why does it happen? Early farming, time becomes even more important because you've now settled a certain piece of land, you've tied yourself to that land, it's to produce the food that's to keep you and your family or community alive. So it's important for you to understand when you should plant, when you should harvest, all these sort of things. The ties to the land as well meant that there was a very concerted effort to create, if you like, origin myths and linkages to people that were on the land before you. In other words, to legitimise your right to own that land, to settle that land, and to pass it on to your children as they came after you. The whole idea of growth and decay becomes very important because you're dealing again with resources you're producing from the land. Plants live, plants die. Why? Weather again is important because you need the weather to grow the plants and the grains and this for you. Animal husbandry. It's also the beginning of communal burial. And as we'll see when we get on, this is maybe the first astronomy, as mentioned already, I think by Professor Kelman at Newgrange. This is the period where this sort of thing occurs. And as I mentioned, ancestors become very important. Where do ancestors go when they die? Do they have an influence on the world we're living in after they've gone? Things like this. The Bronze Age, you're coming into a period where you're developing a hierarchical society. There is the accumulation of wealth through the trade in metals. Copper was mined in South Kerry within the Dark Skies area. So there was people in this area developing, if you like, wealth or creating wealth from mining of copper, exporting it to other parts of Ireland to make bronze. And basically, because you have a hierarchical society, you begin to get an effort to control people in that society. The people at the top like to control the people at the bottom. Some things never change. And a way of doing this is very often to show that you have a deeper understanding or a control over the natural phenomenon and phenomena that might be used to break up time. So you've ritualized the whole idea, say, of the equinox, the solstice, the eclipses, the movements of the moon, and if you then create a caste, a priestly caste that claims to be able to intercede in these or to understand them to a deeper degree, then you have created a level of control down through society, because once you create rituals and a belief system, it integrates the individual into the community and it creates a social order. Trade, also again because of tides, all this sort of thing, moving up and down rivers, coastal transport, again a knowledge of all of these sort of phenomena becomes important. When should we travel, when should we not? What sort of season or storms are more likely, this sort of thing. The Iron Age, as I said, a period that's very little known about in Ireland in real terms in the southern half. We do know it's a period of great climatic change. There was a massive climatic downturn over northwest Europe during the Iron Age, and an awful lot of what we see as evidence of, if you like, a belief system at that time tends to, I suppose, emphasise the harshness of life. You go from communal burials and rich single burials during the Bronze Age to very, very simple burials during the Iron Age. Ecclesiastical, the need to divide the day up even more becomes important. You arrive at a period where, say, early monasteries and all this were based on prayers at certain times of the day, the divine office, so the need to understand a greater division of the day into periods of 3 hours and all becomes important. So you have the development of sundials and these sort of features, of which there are a few in South Kerry. Again, natural phenomena now are seen as signs of the hand of God. And in the medieval period, there's even a greater increase in breaking down the day into smaller and smaller and smaller chunks. And again, this requires a greater understanding of astronomy, movements of the celestial bodies in order to achieve this. And you've gone from a period, if you like, at the very, very start of a very communal time to, by the time you reach the medieval, dealing with personal time. Navigation was also mentioned, and during the medieval period you have increased transport, exploration and all this, and the use of astrolabes and certain things like that for navigation. I mean, I probably don't need to show these are just basically, you know, your equinoxes and your solstices, which would have been very visible to prehistoric man and would have been of interest, and the movements of the moon. Now, from a Neolithic perspective, there are not many Neolithic monuments known of in the Dark Skies area or in South Kerry in general. That's more down to where research has been done rather than to a lack of the monuments themselves, probably. And this map just shows you the buffer zone of the Dark Skies area and the core, and you can see there are 4 Neolithic stone axes in the area, which is quite small compared to the number found in other areas of the county, but a lot of those were found in the 18th and 19th century from ploughing, and because of the landscape here, you know, large-scale ploughing didn't take place. So again, it may be more down to just a lack of research and searching in the area for these things rather than that they don't exist. This is often touted as being possibly the earliest sundial known of in Europe, at least. It's one of the curbstones at Knowth. This is not, might I add, universally accepted, but in the 80s this was proposed as a very early sundial, which also marked the solstices and the equinoxes. This is just an idea of where the line is supposed to be, the gnome going into the hole here, and then you have a sundial and the marks for the various solstices and equinoxes. And this is, as shown already, is the roof box at Newgrange, which the sun penetrates on the solstice at midwinter. As I mentioned, you're in the Neolithic, you're in a period of early agriculture when life and death, decay and growth are very important. And from an archaeological perspective, the light penetrating into the stone basin at the bottom of the chamber in Newgrange has been interpreted as being rebirth. In other words, death and rebirth. It lands on the basin where the cremated remains were put, and archaeologists have interpreted that over the years as the beginning of the season of rebirth, the end of the winter, the beginning of the spring. And this is the earliest Neolithic tomb in the county. Unfortunately, not in the Dark Skies area. It's in a place called Killatlahan near Milltown. It's a portal tomb, probably dates to about 3800 BC, the oldest structure in the county. And this is a shot taken of it this year at the time of the harvest moon, around the 27th of September. Now, wedge tombs are one of the more visible early monuments in South Kerry and in the Dark Skies area. You'll see a few here from Carlhill and Pools East in Valentia, Coomalbell and Sceilge, and Coomatlucan or Caherdaniel. Like an awful lot of the stone circles, stone alignments, wedge tombs as well have a predominance for an orientation northeast, southwest. And it's again likely, given that orientation, that it may have some, alignment of some sort with celestial bodies. Again, it may be due to the whole thing of death, rebirth, and the ending of winter and the beginning of spring. And this is just a map showing you within the South Kerry area where these wedge tombs occur. And you can see there are quite a few within the core area, particularly around the coast, and some also in the buffer zone, including in Valentia Island. Rock art, of which there are quite a number of pieces in South Kerry, and some of the biggest concentrations in Europe are on the borders of the Dark Sky area, is one of the more enigmatic prehistoric monuments, in that nobody's really sure what it represents. At the last count, I think there was 123 theories as to what rock art represents, varying from maps of ring forts, which is impossible given that there's about 3,500 years between them, to star maps, and nobody can tell you whether this is true or whether it isn't true, but you know, it is a highly enigmatic monument. It's a landscape monument. The landscape it's in is as important as the monument itself, and it may or may not have some connection to the movements of the celestial bodies. And as you'll see here on the maps, when you see it drawn, you know, it does look quite, how would I put it, astronomical, but whether it has any real connection or not, nobody can say for certain. This is a distribution map of where rock art occurs within South Kerry. You can see that there are a number of pieces within the general dark skies area, and one of the largest concentrations in the country at Cahersiveen is just on the boundary. Standing stones and stone rows are the monument type, I suppose, most often claimed to have alignments on the moon and the movements of the moon. This is the stone alignment at Drumcare near Waterville. This is the stone alignment at Dury in the Iny Valley. This is at Drumtawakeen in the Bridal Valley in Glencar. This is the tallest standing stone in the county in Dury again. This is stone alignment, first stone alignment at Gorouk near Cardaniel. And this is the well-known alignment at Eagle. Again, a number of these, Eagle, Dury and Drumtawakeen, it has been suggested have alignments on the movements of the moon or the solstice in the case of Eagle. This is a distribution of stone alignments within the area. You can see there are quite a number within the core area, more in the buffer area, and quite a number then outside. And they're very much a monument of the peninsulas in Kerry rather than the interior. Now these are the stone rows in the county that it has been proposed have alignments, astronomical alignments. Aither, as I mentioned, it has been suggested is aligned on the sun at the winter solstice. This was first suggested by Anne Lynch in 1976 and then again in 1981. Clive Ruggles has agreed tentatively with this. He would be one of the leading experts in this area. Dury in the Iny Valley, again Lynch suggested was aligned on the southern limit of a lunar standstill. Drumtawakeen in the Bridal Valley was suggested to be aligned on the summer solstice, and Kildrelig to be aligned again on the limit of a lunar standstill. In general, as I say, the expertise in this area doesn't really exist in Ireland, and Lynch even at the time wasn't necessarily studying alignments on astronomical bodies. It was just mentioned as part of a thesis and in subsequent publications. Ruggles, who has looked at these, would be more of the opinion that an awful lot of these alignments are on prominent landmarks in the landscape rather than on astronomical phenomena. Again, as I say, I'm not an expert in it. I can't offer an opinion one way or the other, but it is an area that has not been researched probably enough. Metalwork, middle and late Bronze Age metalwork. This is just a map showing you where the metalwork is in the county. You can see there's quite a bit of middle and late Bronze Age metalwork within the dark skies area. Now it's another thing that it's maybe not immediately thought of in relation to astronomy and archaeology, you know, but an awful lot of this metalwork is deposited as part of ritual. An awful lot of the hoards of metalwork, we're pretty certain, were deposited in wet places like bogs, river crossings, lakes, and deposited there as part of some ritual that was carried on maybe at a certain time of the year. Again, there is a strong possibility that the timing of these rituals, etc., was based on the movements of the moon or the sun, and occurred only at certain times of the year, possibly to gain favour for harvests to come or anything like this, or prosperity for a certain community. They are evidence, if you like, of the wealth that was continuing to accumulate among these societies, that they're capable of depositing large amounts of metalwork without any hope of recovery. These are just some examples. The axes, one of them is actually from Emlock Lane near Waterville. These gold bracelets, one was deposited in the river at Carnupper. Another one is from Sceilge townland, but not necessarily from the fort. The spearhead is from Tullig near Waterville, the Derry Nan horn, and a sword from Valentia. This is the Great Fort at Sceilge. As I say, we don't know a lot about the Iron Age. One theory in relation to Sceilge was that it wasn't a fort to keep something out, that it was actually, if you like, an amphitheatre, and that an awful lot of the terracing inside was actually seating, and that it was a site that was used for tribal gatherings at certain times of the year. Again, we do know that tribal gatherings occurred at certain times of the year. We know even that when you go into the period of the annals and that it's recorded even in the 800s-900s that tribes had gatherings at certain times of the year to discuss tribal matters and all these. The timing of these gatherings, again, was probably based on certain times of the year, again, probably calculated in relation to the movements of the moon or the sun. Early ecclesiastical, again, there's no shortage of early ecclesiastical sites in the area. There's Zillan Loughan near Portmagee, Killalooig, Killabunya, Tubred, and Carlahillen, all very early sites. Again, a big change in society, the arrival of a monastic way of life, the Book of Hours, the Divine Office, the need for monks to understand time in smaller divisions so that they could, if you like, observe the requirement of their faith to pray at certain times of the day and the evening. And Sceilge, of course. Now, as I say, the medieval day was divided up into a number of times where monks were meant to observe the Book of Hours. You had basically these divisions of the day starting from Lauds at sunrise and moving around every 3 hours until you arrived at Compline at night time, and then night offices during the middle of the night. And how was this time observed? This is the well-known sundial from Kilmalcader, and you can see that for the daytime period it's divided into the canonical hours. The gap between each line is actually called a tide. It's the old name given to the 3-hour gap between each of the periods of the Divine Office, and it's from that we get the word Yuletide or Eventide. It's an Old English word for that 3-hour period. And this is a similar sundial, a tide dial again from a monastic site, which is built into one of the oratories, reused in one of the oratories on Sceilge Vihil. And this, interestingly enough, is a very, very small sundial carved on a piece of bedrock in Farnearach near Cahersiveen that's literally right beside a 19th century cottage, which just shows you that even for a farmer in South Kerry within this area, being able to tell the time was important in the 18th, 19th century as well. And this is a really interesting juxtaposition of one right beside what's effectively probably a pre-famine cottage, and shows that, you know, from, if you like, now where you possibly have a sundial all the way up to, you know, the years just preceding the famine, that the division of the day was important for work and for everything else. This is probably one of the most famous medieval depictions of an astronomical phenomena, if you like. This is Halley's Comet, as seen on the Bayeux Tapestry. The Normans arrived in Ireland in 1169, 1170, and this is after the Battle of Hastings in 1066 when the Normans conquered England, and the Bayeux Tapestry was created to record their feat of defeating King Harold. And you can see Halley's Comet depicted here on the tapestry, and the Latin inscription says, "These men stare in wonder at the star." This sort of, if you like, you know, veneration of the stars, or looking at the stars and wonder, and looking at archaeological monuments and wonder and all this sort of thing, this is good for tourism. This more fantastical version of astronomical things, no matter what your opinion of Ryanair, probably isn't. And the point I'm getting at is that, you know, if you put aside some of the more fantastical claims of pyramids being designed based on the Pleiades or things like this that you might find on the internet, and just take it at its most basic, that, you know, man has always had a requirement to understand when he should do certain things, why he should do them at this time, why this happens, and natural phenomena have been a part of life since man first arrived in Ireland. that's possibly the basis from which to look at archaeological monuments in relation to the skies, the sun, the moon, the stars, whatever, and that some of the more fantastical things possibly should be left aside. I mean, it's interesting again that one of the previous speakers mentioned virtual data and real data. Start at real data and maybe you'll arrive at some of the more fantastical stuff, but you'll have gone through it by the right steps. I'd just be wary that some of the things and some of the claims that are made for astronomy and archaeology are extravagant, unproven, and tend to alienate some of the older people in my profession. And I leave it at that. Thank you.